My name is Susan. I'm 32 years old, and I thought I knew what family meant until the evening I walked into my parents' house and saw my sons sitting on the floor, waiting to share scraps. It was around 6:30. The air smelled like garlic, tomato sauce, and something deeper comfort, or what was supposed to be comfort. I pushed open the door and heard laughter from the dining room, the kind of warm family noise I used to crave as a kid. But when I stepped inside, that warmth turned cold. Jessica's twins, Madison and Connor, were sitting properly at the dining table, slurping spaghetti from shiny plates, milk glasses sweating onto coasters. Their cheeks were flushed, their laughter loud. At the far corner, on the kitchen floor by the doorway, my boys, Jaime, 8, and Tyler, 6, were cross-legged, quiet, holding half-eaten peanut butter sandwiches. "Mom?" Jaime said softly, eyes darting toward me like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to speak. Before I could answer, I heard my mother's voice from the dining room. "Oh, good you're here, Susan. We were just finishing dinner." She didn't even look up from clearing Madison's plate. Dad was in his recliner, TV humming, a plate balanced on his lap. Jessica lounged at the table, scrolling through her phone, perfectly at ease. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, trying to process what I was seeing. The twins had full bellies and seconds waiting in the pot. My boys had crumbs and plastic cups of water. "What did everyone have for dinner?" I asked, forcing a calm tone. "Mom made spaghetti," Madison chirped proudly. "It was really good," Connor added with a grin. "And what about you guys?" I turned to my sons. "Sandwiches," Tyler said, matter of fact. "Grandma said there wasn't enough spaghetti for everyone." I looked toward the counter at the big stainless steel pot, still half full, steam curling up like an accusation. "Actually," I said, walking toward the stove, "why don't we make you some plates before we head home?" "Oh, Susan, they're fine," Mom said quickly. "Children don't need much. They said they weren't hungry anyway." But I knew better. Tyler never turned down food, and Jamie only said he wasn't hungry when he felt unwanted. Jessica didn't even glance up from her phone. "They ate. Kids don't need full meals every time they're here," she said, tone flat, like this was a conversation about pets, not children. That word kids cut deeper than I expected. Not your kids, just kids. Generic, replaceable, unimportant. I served them anyway. I made 2 plates of spaghetti, full and warm, sprinkled cheese the way they liked, and the way their faces lit up, it broke something inside me. They were hungry. Not just hungry for food, but for inclusion, for warmth, for fairness. As they ate, I looked at them, my little boys, sitting on kitchen stools instead of the dining table, and I wondered how many times this had happened without me noticing. "So," I said carefully, "what did everyone do today?" "We watched TV mostly," Jamie murmured between bites. "Any games?" I asked. The cousins exchanged glances before Madison said, "We played video games upstairs." "Did Jamie and Tyler play too?" Silence. "The upstairs games are for older kids," Connor finally muttered, even though he was only a year older than Jaime. "I see," I said. "And what about outside? It's such a nice day." "We played in the backyard," Jessica replied, still glued to her phone. "But you know how it is, different ages, different comfort levels." "Comfort levels?" I repeated, my voice steady but tight. Mom jumped in too quickly. "Different personalities, Susan. Some children are just quieter." But Tyler wasn't quiet. Tyler was joy personified until he came here. Jamie was thoughtful, yes, but never timid. I looked at them, heads bowed over their plates, shoulders curved inward. Something in my chest began to ache. "Well," I said softly, "maybe next time everyone will play together." Jessica sighed. "We'll see. We're pretty busy this summer, pool parties, neighborhood events, things like that." Dad's voice floated in from the living room. "Not all events are open to everyone, Susan. Some are. Specific social circles." And then Mom added, almost tenderly, "We just have to be realistic. Some families, well, they might not be comfortable." Comfortable. That word told me everything. They were talking about my husband, about my children's skin. "How long has this been going on?" I asked quietly. Jessica looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." Susan, Dad said with his usual authority, you're misunderstanding. We're just helping the boys navigate social situations. By excluding them? The world isn't always inclusive, he said, like it was a lesson I should thank him for. Better they learn that in a safe environment. My voice trembled as I said, you think this is safe? Teaching them that their place is on the kitchen floor while their cousins eat at the table? Mom pressed her lips together. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I whispered. You're shrinking my children. Jaime looked up at me, eyes glistening. Can we go home now, Mommy? That was it. That small, broken question was the end of something. Yes, sweetheart, I said. We're going home. I gathered their backpacks in silence. As I helped them put on their shoes, I turned back to my family, the people I had spent my life helping, defending, loving, and all I saw were strangers. Don't leave angry, Mom said softly. We can talk about this later. Talk about what? I asked. How you justify treating my sons like they're less. No one answered. So I walked out. And as I closed that door behind me, I knew something fundamental had shifted not just between me and them, but inside me. Because that night, I finally understood. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shares your table. When I was younger, I thought generosity was love. That the more I gave, the more they'd value me. It took me years to realize that what I was offering wasn't being cherished, it was being consumed. It started when I was 17, the year I got my first real paycheck from a summer job at a small cafe downtown. The smell of coffee and vanilla syrup still clings to that memory. I remember coming home, proud that I'd earned something by myself. Mom smiled, patted my hand, and said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You're such a responsible young woman. Maybe you could help with the electricity bill this month? Things are tight." I didn't even question it. Helping felt good, almost adult. $20 became $50. $50 became $100. And every thank you came with a subtle shift. I was no longer the daughter they cared for. I was the daughter who could provide. Through college, I juggled classes and part-time jobs. Mom's texts always started with affection and ended with requests. "Love you, honey. Can you send $200 to help with groceries? Your father's car needs repairs again." It always sounded temporary. Temporary became routine. By the time I was 25, working full-time in marketing, they no longer asked if I could help. They asked when the transfer would come through. It wasn't malicious. It was casual entitlement dressed as family bonding. Then I married Marcus, and for the first time, someone truly saw the imbalance. He didn't judge them at first. He tried to understand. Maybe they just need a little time to get back on their feet, he'd say. But a little time became 8 years. I thought love was supposed to bind people, but sometimes it blinds them instead. When Mom asked for money for Dad's dental work, she said it so gently. "Insurance doesn't cover everything. You know how your father is about spending on himself." I wired $1,000 that day. When Jessica's car broke down, Dad called, voice trembling. "She needs it for work, Susan. She's struggling as a single mom." $2,000 gone. When they said the roof needed fixing before winter, they sent photos, contractor estimates, the works. $5,000. And a guilt message the next week. "You've always been our responsible one." It wasn't just the money. It was the constant shifting of roles, me, the emotional parent, them, the dependent children. Marcus noticed long before I did. One night, he looked at me across the dinner table and asked gently, "Babe, when's the last time they offered to help you with anything?" I smiled weakly, pretending not to understand. "They're just not like that," I said. "They show love differently." He leaned back, sighed quietly. "I think they show love when it benefits them." That sentence haunted me for years. I didn't want it to be true. So I defended them. I built excuses the way they built needs. When Marcus and I needed help moving apartments, they were suddenly busy. When I had surgery and needed someone to watch the boys, Jessica couldn't get time off work. When Marcus and I asked them to babysit so we could celebrate our anniversary, everyone had plans. But when they needed money, my phone never stopped ringing. I remember one Christmas when Marcus suggested we skip buying expensive gifts for everyone, just for once. "It's not about the gifts," he said. "It's about boundaries." But to me, Boundaries felt like betrayal. So we sent out presents, covered travel costs, hosted dinner, and they all left early, complaining about traffic. That night, Marcus held me as I cried from exhaustion. He didn't say "I told you so," he just whispered. "One day, you'll see that love doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep others warm." I didn't see it then. Not when they forgot my birthday but remembered to ask about my bonus. Not when Jessica posted online about independent single mothers while living off the loan I paid. Not even when Mom said, "Your success is our success," as if my career existed to validate them. It was a slow erosion of self. Every favor chipped away at my peace. Every thank you felt more like a receipt. And yet, I kept saying yes, because that's what good daughters do, right? They fix everything. But what I didn't realize was that each act of generosity didn't draw us closer. It built a wall between who they were and who I had to become to survive them. The irony? The more I gave, the less they respected me. They stopped calling to ask how I was doing. They started calling only to ask when the money would arrive. Marcus would sometimes watch me on the phone, my voice small, my shoulders tense, and he'd shake his head quietly. He knew that one day something would snap. That day came sooner than I expected. Because the moment I saw my children sitting on that kitchen floor, eating sandwiches while their cousins ate at the table, I realized that I'd been funding my family's cruelty. I had paid for every brick in the wall that now separated my boys from love. I left that night with my hands shaking, not from anger, but from recognition. Recognition of the truth Marcus had seen all along. When we got home, I tucked the boys into bed. Tyler mumbled, "Grandma said we don't need as much food." I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You deserve the world, sweetheart. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Then I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, replaying years of phone calls, bank transfers, family dinners that never felt like family. It wasn't just about spaghetti or sandwiches. It was about power, about who deserved more, about who was allowed to take. I had spent my life buying love. And for the first time, I realized I was done paying. For years, I believed my family was simply traditional. They didn't say cruel things outright, they just implied them, like whispers painted over with politeness. It was only when I began seeing the world through my children's eyes that those polite shadows finally sharpened into lines. The first time I noticed something was off, it was at Jamie's 7th birthday party. We hosted it at our house balloons, backyard grill, Marcus manning the barbecue while the smell of charcoal and vanilla cake filled the air. Mom arrived carrying a gift bag that looked half-hearted. Jessica came 20 minutes late but insisted on cutting the cake for pictures, and Dad brought his camera. He lined us up for a family shot. "Jessica, stand in the middle. Madison and Connor on either side. Susan, you and the boys next to them." He took one photo, then adjusted everyone. "Actually, let's do one with just the grandkids," he said. That seemed fine until later, when I saw the print he'd framed for their hallway. Jessica and her kids smiled proudly from the center. Jamie and Tyler were cropped out literally. A picture of half a family, edited to fit their comfort. When I asked Mom about it weeks later, she said lightly, "Oh, it was just the best composition, honey. The lighting on your boys wasn't great." But I remembered the light being perfect. It wasn't about exposure, it was about appearance. Marcus had noticed long before I did. At family dinners, he'd smile through silences so tight you could hear the clink of forks like punctuation marks. They never said anything overt, but their questions always had edges. "Where did you grow up again, Marcus? Your parents still around?" And once, from Jessica, the one that burned longest, "Do you ever worry about how the boys will fit in when they're older?" Marcus always answered kindly, calmly, as though he'd prepared for such questions his whole life. But later, in the car, I saw the exhaustion behind his quiet. "Why do you let them talk like that?" I'd whisper. And he'd just shake his head. "Because it hurts you more than it hurts me." But I used to think their distance was just personality, old-fashioned reserve. But slowly, I began to see patterns. When Madison got a school award, Mom sent photos to everyone. When Jamie's art project was displayed in a local library, she never even asked to see it. When Connor made the soccer team, Dad called it great genes. When Tyler scored his first goal, he called it luck. At family gatherings, the differences multiplied in small surgical ways. Madison got hugs and cheek kisses. My sons got polite pats on the shoulder. Jessica's kids were beautiful. Mine were interesting. Every word was a measurement, every smile, a fraction of affection. I remember one Sunday afternoon vividly. We were sitting on my parents' porch lemonade, sweating on the table, cicadas humming in the heat. Mom turned to me and said, "You know, Susan, you've really built a good life, but sometimes I wonder if it's challenging, being in such a different kind of marriage." I asked what she meant. She hesitated. "You know, cultural things. People can be cruel." Her tone was almost sympathetic, like she was warning me, not wounding me. But the message was clear. You married outside the lines we drew for you. I looked across the yard at Marcus, pushing Tyler on the swing, his laughter mixing with our son's. "Mom," I said quietly, "the only cruelty we face is pretending comments like that are concern." She changed the subject. But something inside me shifted. The following months, the incidents stacked up. A Thanksgiving where Marcus was asked to carve the turkey and then told he didn't have to work so hard like it was surprising. A Christmas gift of matching sweaters for the family, 2 sizes too small for the boys. A New Year's toast where Dad said, "Here's to keeping our family strong and united," while Marcus raised his glass in silence, eyes fixed on the candle flame. Each moment left a hairline crack in the image of the loving family I'd always tried to preserve. I began replaying conversations I used to brush off. The way Jessica once said, "Mixed kids are adorable when they're little, it's just harder later." The way Mom would translate Marcus's words at gatherings, as if his voice needed interpretation. The way Dad always introduced him as Susan's husband, never by name. They didn't hate him, they just never truly saw him. And what you refuse to see, you slowly erase. At night, after putting the boys to bed, Marcus and I would sit on the couch in the glow of the TV we weren't watching. He'd ask, "Do you really think this will ever change?" I wanted to say yes, but honesty felt heavier each day. Instead, I said, "They're just stuck in their ways." He gave a soft, tired smile. That's what everyone says before realizing they're the ones sinking. Still, part of me clung to hope. I wanted to believe that blood meant something sacred, that love could outgrow prejudice if given enough patience. So I kept visiting, kept helping, kept believing that if I just showed them enough goodness, enough normalcy, they'd stop seeing the difference. But the truth was already written, faint and invisible like watermark lines on old paper. Lines dividing who deserved comfort and who didn't. I just hadn't learned how to read them yet. The day I finally did, I would stop being the family provider and start being the mother who refused to let anyone, even her parents, define her children's worth. People always say that truth reveals itself in silence, in the seconds after someone says something unforgivable, and the air goes still. That's what it felt like that night, silence thick enough to choke on. I can still hear the clink of a fork, the faint hum of the TV from the living room, and the way my father's words cut through both. The world isn't always inclusive. Better the boys learn that now, in a safe environment. Safe. He said it like he was offering protection, like discrimination could ever be a form of love. Mom nodded beside him, wringing her napkin in her hands. Jessica scrolled her phone, pretending not to notice the storm building in the air. I stood by the kitchen counter, my children's half-empty plates still warm, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "You think teaching them to expect less is keeping them safe?" I said slowly. Mom blinked. "Sweetheart, that's not what we're saying." "Then what are you saying? Because it sounds a lot like you're preparing them for a world where they should be grateful for scraps." Jessica sighed, that practiced, irritated sigh she always used when she wanted to make me feel dramatic. "Susan, no one's saying they're less than. We're just being realistic. You know how the neighborhood is. People talk." I turned to her. "And what exactly do they say?" She hesitated. "You know, that the boys look different, that it might make things complicated for social events." There it was. The sentence I'd always dreaded, spoken in the same tone you'd use to discuss an inconvenient stain. "Complicated," I repeated. "That's an interesting word for children you're supposed to love." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Don't twist my words. I'm just saying, it's hard for them to fit in. You can't force people to accept things they're not used to. Things? I asked quietly. You mean people? You mean my children? The room went still. Even Dad's TV-muted laugh track faded into background noise. He cleared his throat. Susan, you need to calm down. You're taking this too personally. They're my children, I said, my voice cracking. How exactly am I supposed to take it? Tyler's little voice broke through, small and unsure. Mommy, did we do something wrong? My heart twisted. I knelt down to meet his eyes, those same bright eyes Marcus had, soft brown with gold flecks. No, baby, you did everything right. Grown-ups just forget how to behave sometimes. Behind me, Mom's voice trembled. We're just trying to help them understand how the world works, Susan. I turned, standing tall again. No, you're teaching them that rejection is normal. That love has conditions, that they should eat sandwiches on the floor and say thank you for the crumbs. Jessica muttered. You're being ridiculous. I stepped closer. Am I? Because when my sons sit on your floor while your kids eat seconds, that's not ridiculous, that's cruelty wrapped in manners. Dad rose from his chair, voice stern. Don't talk to your mother like that, we didn't mean any harm. Intent doesn't erase harm, I said sharply. And you know what's worse than strangers judging my family? It's watching my parents quietly agree with them. Mom's face went pale. Susan? No, Mom. For years I've given you everything. Money, time, forgiveness. But not once have you stood up for my children. Not once have you told Jessica to stop talking about comfort levels or social circles. You just nod, look away, and expect me to pretend it's love. Jessica slammed her phone onto the table. Oh, stop playing the victim. You've always had this complex like you're the martyr. We're just honest about the world. The world doesn't need your honesty, I said coldly. It needs your courage. But you don't have that, do you? Her face flushed. You think you're better than us because you make more money? I shook my head. No. I just finally understand that I can't buy your acceptance and I won't let my kids pay for it anymore. That's when Jamie, my quiet, thoughtful Jamie, spoke up. Mom, can we go home? He whispered, barely audible. The sound of his voice shattered the last of my composure. I nodded, my throat tight. Yes, sweetheart, we're leaving. Mom reached for my arm. Susan, don't leave angry. You're overreacting. We can discuss this later. Discuss what? I turned, trembling but steady. How you think my children are less worthy of love because of the color of their skin. How you think I should keep paying your bills while you treat my family like an embarrassment. No one spoke. Even the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. Madison and Connor stared at their plates. Jessica's jaw tightened. Dad looked away. Mom's lip trembled, but no apology came. Do you even hear yourselves? I asked quietly. Because I promise you, my kids do. They hear every word, every pause, every time you choose silence over defense. I picked up the boys' backpacks, my hands shaking. Where are you going? Jessica demanded. Home, I said. To people who don't need to learn how to love us. I led my sons out of that house like escaping a burning room, not running, but walking with the kind of calm that comes only after the last hope has died. Outside, the sky had turned violet, heavy with storm clouds. Tyler clutched my hand. Jaime looked up at me and asked, Mom, why don't they like us? I swallowed the lump in my throat. They don't understand us yet, I said softly. But that's not your fault. It's theirs. We drove home in silence, the car filled with the sound of the rain beginning to fall. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, two boys who deserved a world bigger than their grandparents' narrow hearts. And in that moment, as lightning flashed across the sky, I made a promise to myself. They would never again sit on anyone's floor. Not as long as I was alive to keep them standing tall. When people talk about betrayal, they imagine shouting matches, slammed doors, tears that make noise. But the worst betrayals are quiet. They happen while you're cleaning up dinner plates or tucking your children into bed, realizing that everything you believed was built on conditions you never agreed to. That night, after leaving my parents' house, I didn't sleep. The boys were tucked in, finally resting, but my mind spun like a reel I couldn't stop. Every comment, every sideways look, every comfort level replayed until I could barely breathe. At 2 a.m, I went to the kitchen and sat under the dim light above the sink, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The house felt too still, too clean, like it didn't know yet that something inside me had broken. Marcus found me there an hour later. He didn't say anything at first, just poured 2 mugs of tea and sat beside me. That's one thing I love about him. His silence has always been gentle, never cold. Finally, he asked, "Rough evening?" I laughed softly, a sound more like disbelief than humor. "Rough decade." He studied me for a moment. "They said something, didn't they?" I hesitated. They said a lot of things, but what hurt wasn't the words. It was how normal they sounded saying them. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tell me." So I did. Everything. The sandwiches, the spaghetti, the part where my father called exclusion a safe environment. The moment Jessica said people weren't comfortable with my children. He didn't interrupt once. He just listened, his expression calm, but his jaw set tight enough that I could see the muscle flexing. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You know what's sad? None of that surprises me." I blinked, confused. "You knew?" "I suspected," he said quietly. "I've seen it for years. The way they freeze when I walk into a room. The way conversations stop mid-sentence until I leave. The questions about my background disguised as curiosity." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I didn't want to make you choose," he said simply. "I thought maybe if I just stayed polite long enough they'd come around. I didn't want to put you in a position where loving me meant losing them." I felt tears sting my eyes. He had been carrying this alone, shielding me, hoping time could fix what love alone couldn't. "I should have seen it," I whispered. He reached across the table, resting his hand on mine. "You saw what you needed to see to survive it. That's what good people do, they give the benefit of the doubt until it's gone." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Marcus said, "But Susan, this can't continue. Not the way it's been." "What do you mean?" "I mean your family treats you like a bank, and me like a mistake, and our boys like a problem to manage." His tone wasn't angry, it was heartbreakingly calm, the voice of a man who'd stopped waiting for fairness. I pulled my laptop closer. "Do you know how much I've actually given them over the years?" He shook his head. "Neither do I admitted. "I've avoided looking. It's easier to tell yourself you're being generous when you don't see the numbers." I opened my banking app. The glow of the screen lit our faces as line after line of transfers filled the page. The names: Mom, Dad, Jessica. The notes: car repairs, roof fix. Medical emergency, loan temporary. Temporary. Always temporary. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, scanning. "How far back does this go?" I clicked, "View all transactions." The screen scrolled endlessly. 8 years, I said softly. He did the math faster than I could. "Susan, this isn't help. This is support." My throat tightened. "They've been living on our income." He looked at me gently, but there was a sharp edge beneath his calm. "You've been financing the people teaching your children they're worth less." The truth hit like a slow explosion, quiet, then all-consuming. I scrolled further. The amounts weren't enormous all at once, but together, they built a pattern. $1,000 here, $3,000 there. Then $5,000 for Jessica's car emergency. A few months later, $2,500 for Dad's dental surgery. Then $5,000 for the roof. 8 years. Over and over. The total blurred on the screen. I couldn't even look at the final number. Marcus took a deep breath. "You've given them more than $120,000, haven't you?" My silence was the answer. He leaned back. "So now you know what this really is." "What?" "A system," he said. "They've built a system around you. You're the provider, the safety net, the fix. And the moment you stop providing, they'll panic." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say it wasn't that intentional. But deep down, I knew he was right. My family might not plan cruelty, but they practiced it, over and over, until it became second nature. I looked down at my tea, now cold and untouched. "What do we do?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "We protect our kids, and we stop paying for people who don't love them." The simplicity of it felt radical. But a part of me still hesitated. If I cut them off, they'll think I'm heartless. He gave a small, sad smile. "You've already proven your heart. It's time you prove your backbone." I stared at him for a long time. Then at the screen again, the numbers glowing like confessions. My parents, my sister, my guilt. All of it spelled out in dollars and decimals. I'm done, I said finally, my voice quiet but steady. They've taken enough money, respect, pieces of my peace. I'm taking it back. Marcus reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Then tomorrow, you start by stopping. That night, I lay awake, listening to the rain tapping against the window. Every drop sounded like a question. How much of your love was real, and how much was debt? By morning, I had my answer. Both, but only one was mine to keep. Some truths don't scream. They whisper behind closed doors, certain you'll never hear them. But fate, I've learned, has a cruel sense of timing. And that day, I heard everything. The morning after my late-night revelation, I woke up with the kind of stillness that feels like the eye of a storm. The boys were at school, Marcus had left early for work, and I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where we'd counted every dollar I'd given away. When my phone rang, I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Mom. Her tone was sugar-coated, like nothing had happened. Susan, honey, I've been thinking about yesterday. Maybe we both got emotional. You know how families are. I stared at the teacup in front of me, the same one I'd used the night before. My reflection rippled faintly in the cold tea. Have you? I asked quietly. Of course, she said brightly. You know we love you and the boys more than anything. If we said something that sounded hurtful, it wasn't our intention. The careful phrasing "if we said something" told me everything. Not guilt, not apology, just damage control. Mom, I said slowly, do you believe Jamie and Tyler are your grandchildren the same way Madison and Connor are? There was a pause. Too long. What kind of question is that? Of course they are. Then why don't you treat them the same? She inhaled sharply. Susan, you're overanalyzing. You've always been too sensitive. That word, again sensitive, the family code for inconveniently honest. I let my voice soften. You're probably right. I was tired last night. Maybe I read too much into things. Relief bloomed in her tone instantly. Oh good, I knew you'd come around. You're always so reasonable. Reasonable, the same word they used when they wanted me to fund their comfort. It wasn't praise. It was programming. Actually, I said, I was thinking of stopping by later, to apologize. Maybe we can clear the air? Oh, that would be wonderful. Jessica's coming over for lunch too. We can all talk. Perfect, I said, though my stomach churned. When I hung up, Marcus's words echoed in my head. They'll panic when you stop providing. He was right. But panic wasn't enough. I needed to see the truth in their own words, the ones they said when they thought I wasn't listening. Around noon, I drove to my parents' neighborhood, parking down the street so they wouldn't hear the car. Their blinds were open. I could see Jessica's SUV in the driveway, Mom's floral apron hanging in the window. I let myself in quietly through the back door, using the spare key that had hung on their porch for years. The house smelled of coffee, butter, and familiarity, but beneath it was something sour I couldn't name. I moved slowly through the mudroom, my shoes silent against the old linoleum. Voices drifted from the kitchen, calm, conversational, unaware that their audience had expanded. I can't believe she made such a scene, Jessica said. Her laugh was short, sharp. All that drama over dinner. Dad's voice followed, heavy with irritation. Susan's always been like that. Too idealistic. Thinks love fixes everything. Mom's tone softened in that condescending way only mother's perfect. She'll calm down, she always does, especially when she realizes how much we rely on her. I stopped breathing. Exactly, Jessica said. She acts tough, but give her a week. She'll be back with her checkbook. She always comes back. Because she's soft-hearted, Mom agreed. She'll feel guilty once she sees how much the mortgage depends on her help. My throat burned. They weren't just careless, they were confident. Certain I'd never leave for good. Then Dad spoke, voice low, matter of fact. We did her a favor. The boys need to learn early what life is really like. The siblings' kids eat first, and hers wait for what's left. That's just how it is. My hands clenched. The blood roared in my ears. Jessica laughed. Exactly. My kids are the normal ones. It's better if everyone understands their place early. People notice, Mom added with a sigh. The neighbors already talk. They say things like, "It must be hard for Susan, raising children who look so different." They mean well, but nothing, Jessica interrupted. It's true. They stand out, and honestly, it puts us in awkward positions. The twins' friends ask why their cousins don't look like the rest of the family. What am I supposed to say? Dad chuckled. Say the truth, Susan made her bed. Now she has to live in it. Then came Mom's final words, soft but poisonous. The siblings' children eat first, and mine wait for scraps. That's the way it has to be. That was it. The trapdoor opened, and I fell straight through everything I'd ever believed about them. I stood there frozen, gripping the edge of the wall for balance, my nails pressing into the paint. My mother's voice, the same one that once sang me lullabies, was now casually discussing my sons like they were a burden she wished didn't exist. The air felt heavier than gravity itself. When I finally stepped into the kitchen doorway, the sound of my heels against the tile made them all jump. Mom's hand flew to her chest. Susan, you scared me. You're early. I looked at her, at Jessica, at Dad. 3 people I'd spent my life defending. 3 people who were now strangers wearing familiar faces. I was just telling Jessica how much we enjoyed having the boys yesterday, Mom said quickly. They're such good boys. Were you? I said flatly. Yes, she insisted. So well behaved, so polite. The silence between us was a live wire. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the coffee pot or the plates or every illusion they'd fed me for years, but instead, I did something far scarier. I smiled. I came to get Tyler's water bottle, I said softly. He left it here yesterday. Mom blinked. Oh, of course. Let me help you look for it. I crossed the room, found it on the counter, then turned back. Actually, I said calmly, I heard your conversation just now. The color drained from their faces. What conversation? Mom asked weakly. The one where you explained how the siblings' children eat first and mine wait for scraps. The one where you agreed my sons were born to get leftovers. The one where you decided they should learn their place. Jessica opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Dad looked like he wanted to deny it, but his silence spoke for him. What context? I asked quietly. Makes that okay? No one answered. You didn't just insult my children, I said. You revealed what you've thought all along, that their existence is inconvenient, that the only reason you tolerate us is because I pay for it. Mom started to cry. Susan, please. No. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Save the tears for someone who believes them. I walked to the doorway, then turned back. You've spent years teaching me to feel responsible for everyone's comfort. I hope you're comfortable now, because it's the last time you'll ever do it at my expense. And with that, I left not just the kitchen, but the person they used to control. Outside, the air hit me like freedom, sharp, cold, and honest. I got into my car, my hands trembling, but for the first time in years, they weren't trembling from guilt. They were trembling from power. Because that day, I stopped being their safety net and started being my children's shield. When you stop feeding a habit, it screams before it starves. And when that habit is a family built on your money, the silence afterward sounds almost holy. The morning after I walked out of that house, I opened my laptop like a soldier opening a map. No more emotion, no more second-guessing. Just logistics line by line, account by account. Every automatic transfer canceled. Mortgage contributions gone. Insurance support terminated. Car loan assistance revoked. The feeling wasn't rage, it was clarity. Like stepping into sunlight after years of fog. I called my bank and spoke calmly, methodically. Yes, I'd like to stop all scheduled transfers to the following accounts. When the banker asked, "May I ask why?" I almost laughed. Because I finally remembered my worth, I thought. But all I said was, personal reasons. Next, I called the mortgage company. My name is Susan Walker. I'm listed as a co-borrower on my parents' loan. I'd like to begin the process of removing myself. The woman on the other end hesitated. Are the other borrowers able to qualify on their own? I smiled faintly. They'll have to learn how. She explained the refinancing process, 60 to 90 days. That was perfect. Enough time for them to understand the reality of a world where I no longer existed as their financial backbone. Then I called Jessica's auto lender, where my name sat quietly under hers like a guarantee. I'd like a note added that no additional credit or refinancing can be done without my written consent. The man typed, "Done." By the time I closed my laptop, the house was quiet except for the distant hum of the fridge and the faint tapping of my fingers on the table. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. The first call came that evening. "Dad." "Sweetheart," he said, his voice sugar-coated with false calm. "There seems to be some kind of banking error. The mortgage assistance didn't transfer this month." "No error," I said flatly. A pause. "I don't follow." I canceled it. The line went so quiet I could hear him breathing. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm no longer comfortable funding people who think my children deserve less than their cousins." His voice tightened. "Susan, if this is about that conversation you think you overheard?" "I didn't think I heard it, Dad. I heard it. Every word. Mixed children get leftovers. They need to learn their place. Does that sound familiar?" He sighed, long and defensive. "You're blowing things out of proportion." "No," I said calmly. "I'm just finally measuring things accurately." "You're being unreasonable." "I'm being a mother." He tried again. "We can work this out. Don't do anything you'll regret." I smiled bitterly. "The only regret I have is not doing it sooner." And then I hung up. 20 minutes later, Jessica called. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "What the hell is going on?" "Dad's panicking. The mortgage bounced." "He says you cut them off?" "That's correct." "You can't just do that, Susan. They depend on that money." "Then maybe they should depend on each other." Her voice cracked into desperation. "You're going to ruin their lives." "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to stop financing the version of their lives where cruelty is free." "Look," she said quickly, changing tactics. "We said some things we shouldn't have, but you can't just pull the rug out from under your parents. They're too old to adjust. They're not too old to learn respect." There was silence. Then her voice softened, syrupy, manipulative. "Susan, come on. We're family. You don't want this kind of drama." "You created this drama," I said. "I'm just ending the subscription." She snapped. "You think you're some kind of saint? You're punishing everyone because you're hurt." "No," I said. "I'm teaching you the same lesson you tried to teach my sons, that actions have consequences." The line went dead. Over the next few days, the panic began to spread like smoke through their comfortable lives. Mom called crying, voice trembling with practiced guilt. "Sweetheart, your father and I have bills due. The mortgage, the utilities, we structured everything around your help." I let her speak until the wave of excuses subsided. "Maybe it's time you structured your life around your own income," I said softly. She gasped, as if I'd said something cruel. "You're being vindictive." "I'm being free." Jessica left me 3 voicemails in 2 days. The first angry, the second pleading, the third simply exhausted. "You're going to make them lose their house," she whispered. "Are you really okay with that?" I sat on my porch that evening, listening to her voice message fade into the sound of crickets and distant traffic. The truth was, I didn't want them homeless. I just wanted them honest. And sometimes, honesty only blooms after comfort dies. By week 2, the financial fallout had begun. Their mortgage payment failed again. Jessica's car insurance lapsed. Dad called Marcus this time, thinking he might be the reasonable one. "Marcus, my boy," he began awkwardly. "Perhaps we can talk man to man. I know Susan's emotional right now." Marcus's reply was calm and lethal. "She's not emotional, Mr. Walker. She's awake." After that, the calls stopped for a while. The silence was deafening and peaceful. For the first time in years, my mornings were quiet. No guilt texts, no urgent transfers, no weight pressing on my chest. I made pancakes with the boys, packed lunches, drove them to school while music played. Tyler sang along, off-key but loud. Jaime smiled again, really smiled. At night, Marcus and I would sit on the couch, tea in hand, and just breathe. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" I said once. He nodded. "Freedom always does it first." By week 4, the phone started ringing again. Different tone now, desperation wrapped in apology. Mom's voice cracked through the receiver. "Sweetheart, we're losing the house. Please, We made mistakes, but you can't do this to your family. I'm not doing anything to my family, I said. I'm just not doing anything for them anymore. Jessica texted the next day. If you wanted to make a point, you've made it. They're scared, Susan. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back. Good. Fear means change might finally be possible. It took years for them to teach me my place, the reliable one, the rescuer, the one who never said no. It took 1 month for me to teach them theirs. And in that silence, in that space where their demands used to live, I found something unexpected. Peace, pride, and the laughter of my children, echoing through a house that finally felt like a home. Because I had learned something my family never understood. You can love people deeply, but you cannot love them into decency. Change has a cost. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's comfort. But the hardest kind of change costs you people, the ones who taught you love with conditions and called it family. 6 weeks after I cut them off, I learned through a mutual friend that my parents had listed their house for sale. It sat on the market for 2 months, the same house where every Christmas I'd hung garlands and heard whispered judgments about my husband's skin, the same kitchen where my sons were fed scraps while their cousins had seconds. When I heard they'd sold it, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something quieter. Like the air right before dawn, grief and relief braided together. Jessica started working 2 jobs. Mom moved into a smaller apartment, and Dad, proud, unbending Dad, began taking handyman work for neighbors to make ends meet. For the first time in years, they were living within their means. Without me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. Then one evening, Marcus came home holding his phone with that unreadable expression he gets when something unexpected happens. Your dad texted me, he said. I froze. What did he want? He asked if I'd meet him for coffee, alone. That alone hung in the air. In 8 years of marriage, my father had never asked for time with Marcus, never once. Marcus smiled slightly. I think I should go. Are you sure? He nodded. If he's reaching out, it means he's finally ready to sit in discomfort. That's a start. They met the next afternoon at a small diner off Main Street. Marcus told me later how the conversation went, his voice calm but edged with something raw. He apologized, Marcus said simply when he came home. I looked up from where I was folding laundry, almost not believing it. He did? Yeah. Not one of those half apologies either, he said. I was wrong. I treated you like an outsider in your own family. He said he didn't realize how much damage that caused, until he lost everything that depended on you. I sat down. Do you think he meant it? Marcus thought for a long moment. I think he's scared. But I also think he's trying. And maybe that's the best kind of beginning. 2 days later, Mom called. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Susan, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know we're in counseling. Counseling? Yes. Family therapy. We're learning about unconscious bias and about what we did to you and the boys. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to believe her, but part of me had forgotten how. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued, but I want to understand how we got here. We thought we were protecting our family's image. We didn't realize we were destroying the real one. For the first time, her voice trembled not with manipulation, but with humility. I'm glad you're doing that, I said quietly. She took a shaky breath. We want to see the boys. Only if you're comfortable. No expectations. Just time. Mom, I said gently, you need to understand something. The money isn't coming back, ever. I know, her voice cracked. We're not asking for that. We just want to rebuild something real, for them and for you. I didn't say yes, but I didn't hang up either. 3 months later, we met at a family restaurant, neutral ground. No grand reunion, no speeches, just cautious small talk and awkward smiles over shared fries. The boys were shy at first, sitting close to Marcus, watching my parents carefully. But then Dad asked Jamie about his art project. He listened, really listened, as Jamie described how he'd won a small local contest for his watercolor painting. Tyler talked about soccer, and Mom clapped when he said his team had made the finals. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't warm yet, but it was honest. For the first time, no one pretended everything was fine. And for the first time, That honesty felt like love. After dinner, outside under the golden glow of the parking lot lights, Mom touched my arm. "Susan," she said softly, "losing your financial help was the best thing that ever happened to us." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not something I expected to hear." She smiled sadly. "Because it forced us to face who we'd become. We let comfort replace compassion. Money replaced humility. You took that away, and it made us see how empty we were without the things that truly mattered." Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't undo what I said, what I allowed, but I can promise you, we're trying to earn our way back into your children's lives the right way." I studied her face, older, thinner, but somehow clearer, like the weight of years of denial had finally fallen off her shoulders. Maybe people can change, not quickly, not easily, but painfully, the way metal bends under fire before it holds a new shape. That night, driving home, the boys chattered in the back seat, their voices overlapping with laughter. "Grandpa said my art looked like a sunrise," Jamie said proudly. "Grandma asked about my soccer team," Tyler added, eyes bright. "And she said she wants to come to a game." Marcus reached over and took my hand as I smiled through tears I didn't expect to shed. "Do you think they're really different now?" he asked. I looked in the rearview mirror at our sons, two boys who had once been made to feel small, now glowing with confidence. "I think they're trying," I said, "and that's enough for now." Later that night, standing by the window, I thought about the long road that had brought us here, the years of quiet giving, the betrayal, the anger, the silence, and finally, the space that allowed growth. I'd lost a version of my family, the one I thought I needed to keep the peace, but I'd gained something stronger, a new one, built on respect, boundaries, and truth. And in the soft reflection of the glass, I saw my children playing behind me, free, unashamed, and deeply loved by both of us. They would never learn to eat scraps. They would grow knowing they deserved the whole meal and a seat at the table. Because I finally understood. Love that asks you to shrink is not love. And peace bought with silence is just debt disguised as devotion. I didn't owe them anything anymore except the example of what self-respect looks like. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.